Ma'am, we've had issues with people trying to sneak into first class before, and you don't look like someone who belongs here. That's what the gate agent said, not quietly, not carefully, but loud enough to turn heads and plant shame like a spotlight. Her voice cut through the airport like a slap in public, and she said it to a woman who paid more than most people make in a week for those seats. But what she didn't know is who she had just humiliated. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city below. If you've seen someone judged by how they look or where they're from, hit like. Subscribe if you believe in justice that doesn't wait. Because in this story, it didn't. It was early afternoon at JFK International. Gate B-22, boarding for Apex Air Flight 717 to San Francisco. Everything seemed smooth. The Dreamliner sat polished and still on the tarmac, clouds hanging like quiet witnesses above it. Dr. Ava Mitchell arrived with her 13-year-old daughter, Chloe. They walked side by side, not flashy, just intentional. Ava wore a navy blue pantsuit and low heels, her natural hair in a soft twist pulled back. Chloe, dressed in her school uniform, carried her black backpack and sketchbook, flipping the edge of a Harvard keychain hanging from the zipper. They approached the gate counter where Deborah Lane, a white woman in her early 50s, stood looking tired but ready. Until she saw them. Deborah scanned their boarding passes, pausing longer than usual. Her eyes narrowed. She tilted her head slightly and asked, "You're both in first class?" Ava nodded once, her voice calm. "Yes." Deborah glanced down again, tapped a few keys on her screen, then said, "We've had a few cases lately where people switch tickets with family or friends to sneak into first class, especially with kids involved. Just being thorough." Ava's eyes stayed steady. "The tickets were booked under my name. You'll see they match." Deborah gave a thin, polite smile and added, this time louder, "We've had issues with people trying to sneak into first class before, and you don't look like someone who belongs here." That's when Chloe's hand paused on her sketch pad. The white couple behind them exchanged knowing looks. Deborah eventually handed back the passes and motioned them through. But the damage was already done. Ava didn't say a word as they walked the jet bridge. Chloe looked up and asked softly, "Why did she say that?" Ava glanced down, squeezed her daughter's hand gently, and said, "Let's just take our seats." Inside the aircraft, first class gleamed with quiet luxury. Wide leather seats, soft lighting, polished glass. Jennifer Ross, a junior flight attendant, greeted them with a kind smile. "Welcome aboard." Ava and Chloe settled into seats 2A and 2B. Ava took the aisle, Chloe the window. The cabin was half full. Robert Kinney, a white executive seated across the aisle, gave them a quick once-over and adjusted his AirPods. Across the way sat Eleanor Wu, an older Asian-American woman in a tailored gray blazer, quietly reading a hardcover novel. Chloe leaned toward her mother. "Is it always like this?" Ava glanced at her. "Sometimes, but we're here. That's what matters." Chloe nodded but said nothing more. Then came Sandra Clark, blonde, polished, with a clipboard tucked tight to her side. She walked through the cabin, paused when she saw Ava and Chloe, frowned slightly, and returned a few minutes later. "I just need to verify your seat assignments," she said flatly. Ava handed over their boarding passes again. Sandra stared at them, then back at the passengers. "These are for Dr. Ava Mitchell and Chloe Mitchell?" "Correct," Ava answered. "We're in our assigned seats. We've had some mix-ups lately," Sandra continued. "Sometimes people switch to get into premium cabins." The way she said people hit different before Ava could respond. Mark Hastings, another flight attendant, joined them. "Ma'am, are you sure this is your section?" Ava stayed calm. These seats were booked months ago. I'm sure. Sandra gave a stiff smile. If you could step into the galley, we'll double-check and clear things up. Ava didn't move. Chloe, now clearly distressed, closed her sketchbook. Jennifer Ross, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, from a few rows behind. A quiet voice spoke. It was Malik Carter, an off-duty black pilot traveling as a passenger. She's been in those seats since they boarded, he said plainly. Hasn't moved. Eleanor Wu looked up from her book. They've done nothing wrong, Mark scoffed. Just trying to make sure everything's in order, Ava replied. You are singling out me and my child in front of the entire cabin. That's what's in order? Sandra's expression stiffened. There's no need to be defensive. There's no need to be discriminatory, either, Ava replied, voice still even. Now, unless you're going to physically remove us, I'd like to remain seated until your verification is complete. Mark glanced at Sandra. Sandra gave a nod. We'll call the gate agent. Within minutes, Deborah Lane reappeared at the cabin entrance. Still an issue here? She asked, looking directly at Ava, then down at Chloe. Look, sweetie, this isn't your fault. It's just that first class is for certain kinds of travelers. Chloe looked down, ashamed. Ava stood up slowly, locking eyes with Deborah. I'm a shareholder in this airline, and this little girl is a frequent flyer. So yes, first class is for us. Deborah blinked. The tension now filled the entire front cabin. Robert Kinney looked away, quietly realizing something was wrong. Eleanor Wu shook her head. Malik took out his phone and began recording. Ava sat down again, placed her hand gently over Chloe's, and whispered, We're not going anywhere. And just like that, the cabin wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was a stage. The curtain had risen, and everything was about to change. For good. Ava stayed seated, her posture upright but not aggressive, her voice steady, not raised. She didn't need volume. Presence alone made people uncomfortable. Chloe sat beside her, quiet but visibly shaken, her hands now resting flat on her lap. The sketchbook had been tucked away. Her mother's calm was its own kind of shield. But even at 13, Chloe could tell when something was wrong. The first-class cabin had gone oddly quiet. Not tense, but cautious. Passengers pretended not to watch, but every eye flicked over the top of magazines, behind sunglasses, from half-lit screens. They were watching because they'd felt the shift. The moment when inconvenience had turned into something uglier. A soft knock of heels on the cabin floor broke the silence again. Sandra Clark had returned, this time without Mark. Instead, she had a new look on her face, polite but taut, like someone told to smile during a dentist appointment. We're just trying to ensure everything is resolved before takeoff, she said, looking not at Ava but just over her shoulder. It's standard procedure, Ava replied, her tone unwavering. What part of this feels standard to you? Sandra didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back and whispered something to another crew member. Moments later, a small group began forming at the front of the cabin. Deborah Lane had returned with a clipboard, this time flanked by a uniformed male gate supervisor. They spoke in hushed tones, pointing subtly toward seats 2A and 2B. Ava leaned toward Chloe and whispered, Whatever happens next, just sit still, no matter what they say. Chloe gave a tiny nod. Then, without warning, Mark Hastings reappeared and motioned toward them. We're going to need you to stand and come with us for just a moment. Ava raised her chin slightly. Is there a reason this can't be resolved from my seat? Deborah jumped in before Mark could answer. Dr. Mitchell, we just need to verify one final thing at the gate. It'll only take a minute. Ava looked around. Half the cabin was now listening openly. The off-duty pilot, Malik Carter, had set his phone on his knee and angled the lens slightly in their direction. Eleanor Wu, still seated 2 rows up, had taken out her reading glasses. Robert Kinney looked stiff in his seat, shifting uncomfortably as the moment escalated. "I've already verified everything," Ava replied. "Twice. The seats are paid. The names match the manifest. I'm not going anywhere." Deborah leaned in, voice tight. "Ma'am, if you don't comply, we'll have to involve airport security." Ava didn't even blink. "Then go ahead. But before you do, you may want to verify something yourself." She reached into her leather laptop case, pulled out her phone, and opened an app. Apex Air Executive Portal. She tapped twice, then turned the screen to show the gate supervisor. The screen displayed her full profile. Dr. Ava R. Mitchell, Chief Strategy Officer, Apex Air Holdings, 30.4% ownership stake, verified. The man blinked, visibly startled. Deborah tried to hide her reaction, but it was too late. Ava added, "While you're at it, check the shareholder memo sent last quarter. You'll find my name next to the word decision maker now. Do you still need me to leave my seat?" The gate supervisor stammered. No, ma'am. Of course not." Deborah stepped back as if burned. Sandra, still standing by, opened her mouth to say something, but closed it just as quickly. The cabin was dead silent. Chloe looked up, confused. "Mom, what just happened?" Ava gave her daughter a soft smile. "Nothing. We're just staying where we belong." Malik Carter leaned across the aisle. "Well played," he said quietly. "They had no idea who they were talking to." Ava looked at him. "They never do." Jennifer Ross, the junior flight attendant who had been watching from the galley, stepped forward timidly. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm really sorry. If I can get you or your daughter anything, please just let me know." Ava nodded. "Thank you. Jennifer, you've been the only professional in this cabin since we boarded." Sandra flinched at the remark. Chloe's shoulders finally relaxed. Just a little. She reached for her sketchbook again, her fingers trembling less now. From across the cabin, Robert Kinney cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Dr. Mitchell," he said stiffly, I didn't know who you were, and I admit I made assumptions. That was wrong of me." Ava looked at him, not coldly, but without smiling. "It wasn't about who I am. It was about who you assumed I couldn't be." Robert looked down. "You're right." Eleanor Wu spoke next. "There's a kind of silence people expect from women like you, from children like her. But the way you held yourself, that spoke louder than anything they said." Ava blinked slowly. "Thank you." The gate supervisor quietly exited the cabin, Deborah trailing behind him, her posture now tight with embarrassment. At the front of the aircraft, Sandra and Mark exchanged nervous glances. The damage was done, not just to protocol, but to perception. Chloe leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "I don't want to fly with them anymore," she said softly. "You won't have to," Ava replied. "We'll deal with this when we land, right now. You just breathe." And for the first time since boarding, Chloe exhaled deeply. She didn't know exactly what had happened, not in corporate terms, but she knew something had shifted. Her mother hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made threats. But she had made a statement. One the entire cabin had heard loud and clear. They weren't just passengers anymore. They were witnesses. And the flight hadn't even left the ground. The flight hadn't moved an inch. But something inside that first-class cabin had already shifted. The buzz of casual conversation had faded. Now there was only the hum of overhead vents and the occasional click of a seatbelt being adjusted. Background noise to something heavier. Ava remained seated in 2A, Chloe beside her, leaning just slightly into her mother's side. The girl hadn't said much since the confrontation, but Ava could feel it in her silence. 1,000 thoughts churning, questions too big for her age. Across the aisle, Robert Kinney stayed uncharacteristically still, his phone untouched. Further up, Eleanor Wu turned pages quietly, though her eyes occasionally lifted to scan the space with quiet awareness. And Malik Carter, still in his window seat, had set his phone aside after stopping his recording. He hadn't posted anything yet. He was waiting, watching to see if this plane was about to become a bigger story. Then, without warning, Sandra returned, not with another demand, but with a tray of drinks. "Would you care for water, Dr. Mitchell?" she asked, voice tight, almost rehearsed. Ava didn't answer immediately. She looked her in the eye and said, "We're fine." Chloe looked up briefly, then down again. Sandra stood for a second too long, clearly wanting to say something more, maybe to salvage what little grace she had left. But she turned and walked away, the tray still half full. Mark Hastings passed her in the aisle moments later, his jaw clenched, his face stiff. His eyes met Ava's for a fraction of a second, and in them, she read something familiar, not regret, not reflection, but frustration, the kind of anger people feel when they're caught, not when they're wrong. Ava reached for Chloe's hand and gave it a light squeeze. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong." Chloe leaned in and whispered back, "But I felt like I did." That answer cut deeper than any insult had. Ava kissed the top of her daughter's head, her voice soft but firm. "That's how they want you to feel. But we don't carry their shame." A few seats behind, Jennifer Ross quietly approached. "Dr. Mitchell," she said in a near whisper, "the captain would like a word when you're ready. Privately, if possible." Ava nodded. "Tell him I'll come to the front in a moment." Jennifer left without lingering. Ava turned to Chloe. "I'll be right back, okay?" Chloe nodded, still hugging her sketchbook. Ava stood and walked toward the front galley, where Captain Tomas Alvarez was waiting just outside the cockpit. He was in his mid-50s, Latino, with a well-kept mustache and the weary but steady look of a man who's flown through more storms than he's had time to count. He gave a polite nod. "Dr. Mitchell," he began, "I wanted to offer a personal apology for what happened. That's not how we treat our passengers. Not on my aircraft." Ava nodded once, folding her arms calmly. "Yet, here we are." Alvarez didn't flinch. "I understand this situation has already escalated, but I want you to know, I've spoken to ground operations. The individuals involved, including the gate agent, will be grounded and investigated after this flight. This isn't going unnoticed." "Good," Ava said, "because I'm not letting it go." Alvarez gave a slow nod of agreement. "And you shouldn't. But I'd ask that we get through this flight safely first. Then do what you must." Ava studied him for a moment. "Tell me something. Captain, if I hadn't shown you proof of who I am, would this be a different conversation?" Alvarez hesitated just slightly. "I hope not. But in this world, I've seen what happens when truth doesn't come with a title." Ava's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened, just a little. "Then thank you for meeting me with respect. Let's finish this flight with integrity." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "I'll make sure the crew stays out of your way from here on." Ava returned to her seat. Chloe glanced up immediately. "Is it over?" Ava smiled. "It's quiet now. That's a good start." As the final passengers boarded and the door sealed shut, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Apex Air Flight 717. Today's flight time is approximately 6 hours. We're scheduled for an on-time departure, Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for departure. His voice was smooth, practiced, but to Ava, it now carried weight. She glanced around. Mark and Sandra moved about in silence, no longer offering forced smiles. Jennifer stayed near the rear of first class. Keeping a respectful eye, Chloe whispered. Are we safe now? Ava whispered back. We were always safe. They just didn't expect us to know it. A few minutes later, the plane pushed back from the gate. The soft rumble of the engines rolled under the floor. Ava leaned back in her seat, eyes closed, but not to rest, to center. Chloe drew again in her sketchbook, but this time her lines were firmer, her hand steadier. Across the aisle, Robert Kinney suddenly looked up and asked, Dr. Mitchell, do you mind if I say something? Ava opened her eyes. Go ahead. He cleared his throat. What I saw back there, the way they treated you, I've never really thought about how that happens. Not like that, Ava replied. It doesn't need your guilt. It needs your awareness. Robert nodded. Understood. Then he said quietly, Thank you. Eleanor Wu, overhearing, chimed in with a soft smile. Sometimes change starts with discomfort. If you're squirming, it means you're learning. Chloe smiled faintly. For the first time since boarding, she looked up, not down. Ava glanced at her daughter, her voice barely a whisper. Eyes forward, baby. That's where we're going. And as the jet lifted off, pressing them gently into their seats, a new sense of gravity settled in, not from altitude, but from truth. In 17 minutes, they hadn't just held their seats, they'd held their ground, and that changed everything. The plane was now airborne, but the tension in the first-class cabin hadn't completely lifted. It just shifted, like turbulence moving beneath the surface. Ava sat still, watching the clouds outside her window drift past like soft witnesses. Chloe was sketching again, quieter than usual but no longer hiding. Her strokes were stronger now. Ava could feel it in her daughter's energy. Something had cracked open in her. Not just sadness, but awareness. Across the aisle, Robert Kinney had gone back to pretending to read. Though the pages hadn't turned in 5 minutes, Eleanor Wu was working on a crossword puzzle, but occasionally looked up, not to eavesdrop, but to simply hold space with her eyes, an unspoken solidarity. And somewhere near the galley, Malik Carter was typing on his phone. He wasn't posting the video yet. He was writing something, calculating, thoughtful. Ava didn't know him, but she could tell he was a man who understood timing. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the seatbelt sign blinked off. Sandra returned to the aisle with a cart, her voice unusually flat as she began asking passengers about beverages. When she got to Ava and Chloe, she didn't make eye contact. Drink? She asked curtly. Ava looked up. I'll have sparkling water, and my daughter will have ginger ale. Sandra poured without a word. Chloe said, Thank you. But Sandra moved on like she hadn't heard it. Ava sighed quietly, then turned to her daughter. You did everything right, sweetheart. Chloe looked at her and asked, So why do I still feel like I did something wrong? Ava's answer came slowly. Because you're being asked to carry someone else's discomfort. It's not yours. Let it go. Chloe nodded but didn't say anything else. A few rows back, Jennifer Ross had been watching. She gently walked forward after Sandra passed. She crouched next to Ava's seat, voice low. I want to apologize again. I should have spoken up sooner. I saw it happening. Ava looked at her. You froze. Jennifer nodded, shame visible in her eyes. Yes, I did. Ava didn't scold her. She simply said, Next time. Don't, Jennifer whispered. I won't. I promise. Then stood and returned to her post. Moments later, Mark came down the aisle. He had the walk of someone trying to pretend nothing had happened, but his eyes betrayed it. He was nervous. He paused near Ava's row, seemed like he might say something, then kept moving. Chloe noticed and whispered, "Why do people only get quiet after they've already done the wrong thing?" Ava smiled faintly. "Because silence is easier than accountability." Malik Carter finally stood up, stretched, and approached Ava's row. He leaned slightly toward her without being intrusive. "You handled that with more grace than most people ever could," he said quietly. "I'm a pilot with Skylink. Off duty today. I've seen this happen before, but never to someone with your level of composure." Ava tilted her head. "You'd be surprised how often grace is mistaken for weakness, until it isn't." Malik nodded. "If you'd like the footage, I'll send it to you. I caught it all. Gate to galley, no narration, just facts." Ava thanked him. "Let's wait. There's a right time for truth." He slipped a card into the sleeve of her seat. "Just say the word." Then he returned to his place. Chloe asked, "You're not going to post it?" Ava shook her head. "Sometimes the goal isn't to burn down the house. It's to make them hand you the keys." As the cabin settled, dinner service began, and with it came more awkwardness. Mark returned with trays and passed theirs without a word. Ava gently raised her hand. "Excuse me, is there a vegetarian option for my daughter?" Mark didn't look at her. "We're out," he said. Ava's brows raised. "You didn't ask her preference." "It's policy to serve status members first," he replied flatly. "I assumed." Ava stared at him. "You assumed wrong. She's a gold member," Chloe added softly. "I fly every month to visit my grandma." Mark turned slightly red. "I'll check again." When he came back, his hands were shaking slightly as he handed over a covered dish. Ava accepted it silently. As he turned to go, Robert Kinney, who had been silent for a while, spoke up. "You know," he said toward Mark, "I've flown Apex Air every quarter for 8 years. I've never once seen a crew treat someone this badly." Mark froze, then muttered something about following procedure before walking off. Robert looked at Ava and said, "If you ever decide to take over this airline, let me know. I'd invest." That earned the first real smile from Ava since boarding. She replied, "Let's see how this flight ends first." The meal passed quietly. Chloe ate more than usual. Ava only picked at hers. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Sandra returned, her tone suddenly professional. "Dr. Mitchell, the captain has requested to speak with you once more, privately." Ava raised a brow. "What's changed?" Sandra's lips tightened. "I was told you'd want to hear it directly." Ava stood, told Chloe she'd be right back, and followed Sandra to the front of the cabin. There, waiting beside the cockpit, was Captain Alvarez with a tablet in hand. He looked up, met her gaze with a strange calm, and said, "Dr. Mitchell, you're not going to believe what's just been uncovered about this crew." Ava folded her arms. "Go on." Alvarez lowered his voice. "We just received word from our executive office. You were flagged, not by accident. There's a private staff channel on the crew system. Photos, comments. Someone on board shared your name the moment you checked in. The remarks were inappropriate and targeted." Ava's face remained still, but her stomach turned. "How long has this been happening?" "Long enough," Alvarez said. "They're launching a full investigation now. You have the right to pursue action. And as far as I'm concerned, you should—" Ava nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me. We'll land in 5 hours," he added. "But the fallout, that's already begun." Ava stepped back into the cabin, her heels clicking softly against the floor. When she sat back beside Chloe, Her voice was even. "Things are worse than I thought," she said softly. "But we're not done yet." And this time, it wasn't just her daughter who was listening. The whole cabin leaned in. For the next hour. The flight glided smoothly at 36,000 feet. But down in first class, a storm had begun to brew. Not one of shouting or chaos, but of quiet reckoning. Ava sat upright in her seat, her fingers lightly drumming the armrest, not out of impatience but precision. She was thinking, calculating, processing every word Captain Alvarez had just told her, a private crew channel, a thread of jokes and photos shared by flight staff before she even boarded, comments that were targeted. She didn't need to see the screenshots to know what they said. She'd seen it before. Black women in power reduced to threats or entertainment, labeled aggressive, suspicious, or difficult, simply for showing up. And now it was happening at 36,000 feet, while her daughter sat watching, while strangers filmed, while the plane cruised west like nothing had happened. Chloe was asleep beside her now, her head tilted gently to the side, sketchbook on her lap, pencil still tucked between her fingers. Ava didn't want to disturb her. Her daughter deserved rest, something more than resilience. Across the aisle, Robert Kinney had taken off his tie. He hadn't spoken again since dinner, but he hadn't stopped glancing over either, not with fear, but with the kind of curiosity that comes after shame. Eleanor Wu was finishing her crossword puzzle, sipping tea with that same calm elegance she carried from the moment she boarded. She had become, quietly, a pillar in the cabin, a witness who understood without needing to explain. In the galley, the energy was different, tense, quiet. Sandra and Mark had stopped walking through the aisle unless absolutely necessary. Jennifer Ross moved among the passengers gently, now with a confidence that Ava had noticed building since their earlier conversation, and Malik Carter, seated near the back of the cabin, was still writing, his phone in hand, notes open, thumbs moving. He looked up at Ava once. Their eyes met, and he nodded slightly. She returned the gesture. It wasn't agreement. It was alignment. Another hour passed. Then a soft chime. The captain's voice came through the speaker again, steady but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed of a sensitive issue involving our in-flight team. As a result, certain members of the crew will be relieved of their duties upon landing. We assure you, the safety and comfort of all passengers remains our top priority." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Eleanor looked up. Robert turned his head. Chloe stirred awake. "What was that?" she asked softly. Ava reached for her hand. "Just a little turbulence," she said calmly, even as her daughter stared back at her with tired but knowing eyes. "Are you okay?" Chloe asked. "I will be," Ava said. "We will be." And she meant it, because something had shifted, not just in policy, but in momentum. Minutes later, Jennifer Ross approached. Her face was pale, but her steps were firm. She crouched near Ava's row and whispered, "Dr. Mitchell, you're requested to speak with Apex Air's executive office. Captain said they're patching the call through now." Ava blinked. "Mid-flight?" Jennifer nodded. "It's secured through cockpit comms. They said it couldn't wait." Ava rose carefully, adjusted her blazer, and followed Jennifer to the front. The cockpit door opened briefly, and she was ushered into a side crew area with a headset. Captain Alvarez stood by, arms folded, respectful. Ava placed the headset on. The voice on the line was crisp, male, professional, but uneasy. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Daniel Reyes, Chief Operating Officer at Apex Air Holdings. First of all, I want to personally apologize for everything you've experienced on this flight. And prior to it, What you endured is unacceptable and directly violates our values, training, and internal policies. Ava didn't respond. She just listened. Reyes continued. We've reviewed the internal crew channel messages. The content is inexcusable. 3 employees have been suspended immediately, pending formal termination once this flight touches down. Ava spoke for the first time. Suspended isn't enough. If this had happened to a less visible passenger, someone without credentials or title, would you be calling them at altitude? There was silence on the line. Then Reyes replied, No, probably not. But that's part of what we're trying to fix. We're not asking you to go easy on us. We're asking for the chance to make it right, publicly, transparently, and immediately. Ava let the silence stretch for a second. Then she asked, Who else is on this call? Another voice came through. This time, female. Dr. Mitchell, this is Elaine Carter, Head of Legal Affairs. I want you to know we are already preparing a full report for the FAA and internal review. In addition, we're offering your legal team access to all communications and documentation. No redactions, no stalling. Ava nodded to herself. Good, because I have no intention of filing quietly. Elaine's voice didn't flinch. Understood. But before you do, would you be willing to meet with the board after landing? We're not trying to control the story. We're trying to learn from it. Ava's tone softened. Barely. That depends. Will the people who insulted my daughter be there to listen? Elaine replied. They won't be employees by the time you touch down. Ava pulled off the headset. Captain Alvarez gave her a small nod. Well? He asked. Ava exhaled. They're scrambling, and they should be. She returned to her seat. Chloe looked at her with wide eyes. Did they apologize? Ava sat down, buckled in, and said, They did. But we're not finished yet. A few rows back. Malik quietly hit post on his phone. The video, beginning with Deborah's insult at the gate and ending with the captain's in-flight announcement, was now live. Within minutes, it would be everywhere. But Ava didn't watch the numbers. She didn't need to, because her daughter was watching her now, and she knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about record, proof, evidence, that when you show up with dignity, grace, and strength, the world has no choice but to reckon with you. The moment the plane began its descent into San Francisco, something shifted again. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when the storm passes, when the fog lifts and people are forced to see exactly what's in front of them. Ava looked out the window, watching the golden coastline inch closer. Chloe leaned against her shoulder now, awake but quiet, her voice resting even if her thoughts weren't. First class was silent, not out of awkwardness anymore, but reverence. Everyone on board had felt the shift. They'd seen something unfold in real time that most people only read about afterward. No one had expected that the woman who was so calmly harassed at the gate would be on the phone with the COO of the airline midair. No one expected her to keep her composure the entire time. And no one expected her to do it while holding her daughter's hand, teaching her not through anger, but through example. As the seatbelt sign came on and the final announcements played overhead, the cabin lights softened. Sandra Clark and Mark Hastings were nowhere to be seen. They had been quietly pulled from duty and moved to a jump seat near the rear of the aircraft. Jennifer Ross remained the only visible crew member in first class. And even then, she walked gently, spoke sparingly, and treated Chloe with the kind of care usually reserved for VIPs. As the wheels touched the runway and the brakes engaged, there was no round of applause, just silence, the kind that follows truth, the kind that says we saw it too. The aircraft taxied slowly toward the gate, But before the door even opened, Ava's phone buzzed. Her assistant, already briefed on everything, had texted, "Media already picked it up. CNN and the Times. Your statement?" Ava didn't type one. Not yet. She didn't need the headline. Not when she had the moment. She reached over and gently brushed a curl from Chloe's forehead. "We're going to walk off this plane like we walked on," she said. "With dignity. Don't look down. Don't shrink. And don't let anyone make you feel smaller than you are." Chloe gave a small, firm nod. Outside the window, Ava could already see them. 3 airline officials standing at the gate entrance. 2 in suits, 1 with a tablet, clearly waiting. She knew that look. The scramble to contain fallout. The hope that the right apology might soften the blow. But Ava wasn't here for apologies. She was here for accountability. When the cabin door opened and passengers began rising, no one rushed ahead. Robert Kinney stepped aside to let Ava and Chloe go first. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His silence this time was respectful, not complicit. As Ava stepped into the jet bridge, Chloe at her side, one of the airline reps stepped forward with a careful smile. "Dr. Mitchell, welcome to San Francisco. If we could have a moment." Ava held up one hand. "Not here. My team will coordinate with yours." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slow her pace, and no one stopped her. The walk through the terminal felt long, not because of distance, but because of awareness. Phones were out. Eyes followed them. A few passengers from the back cabin had already seen the viral post, someone whispered. "That's her," someone else said. "She's the one they tried to remove." Ava didn't react. Chloe walked tall beside her, holding her mother's hand like a lifeline. They didn't stop until they reached the exit doors. Outside, a black car was already waiting. The driver opened the door without a word. As Chloe climbed in, Ava paused just long enough to look over her shoulder, back toward the terminal, the plane, the people still watching, and then, without drama or spectacle, she got into the car, closed the door behind her, and left the mess to those who made it. Because sometimes the loudest statement is simply walking away with your power intact.